Canada has launched a bold economic independence plan, signaling it no longer needs approval from its powerful southern neighbor.
Analysts warn this trillion-dollar push to build at home could permanently shift economic power across North America.
Breaking tonight, Canada just executed the most devastating power play in modern North American history. Washington didn't see it coming. They never do. Tensions reached a breaking point in Ottawa tonight. Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled Canada's comprehensive economic independence strategy. And instead of cautious diplomacy, he deployed an economic architecture that renders American leverage obsolete. Everyone believed Canada would eventually fold to Trump's tariff threats. Wall Street assumed Ottawa would negotiate from weakness. Political analysts predicted Canada would maintain its traditional dependency on American markets. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, this evening. The room was packed. Journalists, cameras, the works. Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped up to the podium, and what came out wasn't your typical budget announcement. This was different. He was calm, sure, but there was something else in his tone. Finality. The message he delivered didn't just hit Ottawa, it traveled fast. Washington heard it, trading floors heard it, and everyone understood immediately that something fundamental had just shifted in how North America works. Because tonight, Canada said something to America it's never said before. We don't need your permission anymore. It started with a phrase so ordinary, it almost disappeared into routine political theater. It's official, Carney said. But the pause that followed, the precision in his tone, transformed those two words into something far more significant. What came next wasn't negotiation. It wasn't diplomatic maneuvering. What he said next wasn't a negotiating position. It wasn't an opening offer. It was a statement of fact. Carney's message was absolute. Canada's future would no longer be tied to Washington's decisions. The room went quiet. You could feel it, because everyone there knew exactly what that meant. For decades, Canadian prime ministers have played it careful. They'd balance things, keep Washington happy, make adjustments when needed. But Carney didn't play that game tonight. He just stopped playing it. Done. Over. But Carney didn't sidestep that reality tonight. He confronted it directly and announced Canada was stepping out of that pattern entirely. Dear viewers, between November 2024 and this moment, something extraordinary happened in North American power relationships. Trump pushed too hard. Carney said no. And Canada, strategic, patient Canada, stopped waiting for American permission and started building something Washington never anticipated. For months, Carney had been watching. Trump would throw a tariff threat. Markets would panic. Then another midnight policy flip. More chaos. Another tweet. More uncertainty. And while everyone else was reacting, Carney was taking notes. He wasn't getting emotional about it. He was building something. And when it finally came together, it was so complete that there was no easy way to tear it down. Trump kept playing his usual game, threats and unpredictability, economic pressure as a weapon. But Carney was doing something else entirely. He wasn't trying to beat Trump at chaos. He was building a system where Trump's chaos no longer mattered. At the center of this new architecture stood Build Canada Homes. To outsiders, it sounded like standard domestic policy, housing development, infrastructure investment, job creation. But when Carney explained the details, the deeper strategic purpose became clear. This wasn't just about providing homes. This was about creating an economic ecosystem that functions independently of American supply chains, American capital, and American approval. The plan establishes a federal organization capable of transforming housing construction into a self-sustaining industrial operation. By leveraging public land, large-scale financing, and advanced factory production methods, Canada would reduce building times by 50%, cut costs by nearly 20%, and slash emissions simultaneously. Those numbers were impressive, but what truly mattered wasn't the statistics. It was what they represented. Translation: Canada was done waiting for American resources to flow north. For generations, Canadian economic development has depended on signals from Washington. Trade agreements required American consent. Major infrastructure projects needed American investors. Economic growth waited on American markets. That waiting ended in this room with this announcement delivered by a prime minister who'd clearly decided that dependency was no longer acceptable. Then came the initiative that changed everything. The Buy Canadian policy. It sounded simple, almost like a slogan. But what Carney unveiled was a complete restructuring of how federal spending would operate. Every government dollar, from infrastructure to defense contracts, would now default to Canadian suppliers first, not as a preference. As policy, he laid it out systematically, like an engineer presenting a blueprint. Build Canada Homes, the Alto high-speed rail project, the National Defence Investment Agency. Every component would be built, supplied, and operated primarily through Canadian companies using Canadian materials and employing Canadian workers. For years, American corporations had dominated Canada's supply chains, extracting profits while maintaining control firmly in U.S. hands. Carney didn't denounce this arrangement. He simply announced it was over. Because once Canada stops importing American materials, tariffs lose their power. A threat only works if the other side still needs what you're withholding. Carney quietly removed that need, and in doing so, erased Trump's leverage. But he wasn't finished. After establishing the new foundation, Carney offered Canada a choice. His tone remained calm, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable. There were two paths forward, he explained. One followed the old economic rules. Cut spending, cling to outdated models, wait for growth to trickle down. The other demanded courage, massive investment, structural transformation, a refusal to be defined by dependency. He paused, then drew the line clearly. His message was direct. Canada must choose the second path, and then came the phrase that captured the spirit of the entire announcement. Carney's declaration was simple but powerful. We choose Canada. 3 words. But they carried the gravity of a nation reclaiming its narrative. Right there, you could see the difference between what Trump does and what Carney's doing. They both talk about sovereignty, sure, but the approaches couldn't be more opposite. Trump's whole thing runs on fear. Everyone's out to get us, everyone's stealing from us, everyone's taking advantage. That's the fuel. Carney's approach, it's confidence. Canada can handle this. Canada can build this. Canada doesn't need to be afraid. Then a journalist threw him a curveball. New Brunswick's forestry industry. Nearly 3/4 of what they produce goes to American markets. Washington's threatening to shut that down. Nearly 3/4 of its exports go south, the journalist noted, and Washington's trade restriction threatened billions in revenue. It was the perfect setup for a defensive answer. But Carney's response revealed the essence of his strategy. He acknowledged the facts directly. Yes, much of the province's industry relied on American demand. Yes, the U.S. was closing its markets. But instead of retreating into concern, he laid out a plan that treated the problem as an opportunity. First, expand domestic production through Canadian procurement. Second, diversify trade partners globally. Third, reimagine the forestry sector itself, transforming raw materials into higher value products that could compete anywhere. None of those solutions required Washington's approval. And then came the line that reframed the entire relationship. His position was clear. Ottawa would negotiate with Washington when appropriate, but Canada was equally prepared to offer other things America needed in exchange for what Canada required. Translation: Trump had long treated tariffs as weapons, assuming dependency made every nation vulnerable. Carney had flipped the equation entirely. The more Canada could operate independently, the more leverage it gained in every negotiation. He summarized it with devastating precision. The United States had changed its interpretation of trade rules, creating a radically different environment than anything seen in modern history. The word radically echoed twice, an intentional rhythm meant to drive the point home. The world had changed, and Canada was no longer playing by NAFTA-era rules. Trump may have broken that system with his chaos, but Carney had built something to replace it. Then came the numbers that silenced even the skeptics. $1 trillion investment plan, not framed as stimulus or bailout, but as a statement of capacity. The funds would flow toward housing, infrastructure, clean energy, artificial intelligence, and national manufacturing, each reinforcing the same central idea. Canada's economy would no longer depend on American political tides. Carney's delivery never shifted from calm to forceful. He didn't need theatrics. The message carried its own weight. His position was clear. Canada would maximize forestry employment, but create far more jobs in housing, energy, and manufacturing across the entire country. Translation: Canada would no longer fight over scraps from Washington's table. It would build a new table entirely. And then, almost casually, he delivered the line that captured his entire vision. Carney's framework was fundamental. These policies didn't require American permission. Canada controlled them. Canada decided them. This was Canada's future. There was no triumph in his voice, no applause line, just quiet finality. It was the tone of someone speaking from absolute certainty, and then he delivered the line that captured where this is all heading. His commitment was clear. Ottawa would spend less time discussing American actions and more time building Canadian capacity. Translation: Trump's economic leverage over Canada just became obsolete. Not because of political theater, not because of rhetoric, because Carney built infrastructure that makes Trump's threats irrelevant. The tariff weapon Washington relied on for decades. It only works if the other side still needs what you're withholding. Carney removed that need. And when dependency disappears, leverage disappears with it. Because Carney understands something fundamental about power. It doesn't come from forcing others to need you, it comes from not needing them at all. Trump built his leverage on the illusion of indispensability, using economic coercion to bend others to his will. That approach only worked as long as no one could function without him. But what happens when a nation decides it can? That's when power shifts. Carney's policies, Build Canada Homes, Buy Canadian, the $1 trillion investment plan, aren't temporary measures designed to outlast a single administration. They are permanent structural changes that will endure regardless of who occupies the White House. Trump could win another term or fade from politics entirely. It no longer matters because the architecture Carney is constructing will stand independent of that outcome. And perhaps that's the most strategic element of all. Carney never attacked Trump directly. He didn't insult him, didn't personalize the conflict. Instead, he built a system that makes Trump irrelevant. One press conference, one declaration, one quiet revolution disguised as a budget announcement. Mark Carney didn't need to argue or provoke. He simply demonstrated what leverage looks like in the modern world. Because in the end, leverage belongs to whoever needs the other side least. Trump needs control over Canada. But Carney just proved Canada no longer needs Trump. What's your take on Canada's independence strategy? Does this change North American power dynamics permanently? Share your thoughts below.